So Logan, you just came out with an article on Mark 7. Really, it's on 7:20.
719C.
Okay, right. Sorry.
The last 5 words.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell me, what
Really
is your thesis on that, and how does it change, what the passage means?
So the main contribution from a language or grammar perspective is that I'm interpreting that final phrase, kathorizon panta tavromata, as a part of Jesus' speech in 7:18 through 19. So most English translations, I would say most recent English translations in the last maybe 150 years, would take those final 5 words and translate it as a full independent clause in English, often in parentheses. Thus, he declared all foods clean. Now, in Greek, for those of you who know participles, kathorizon is not a finite verb, and those final 5 words cannot constitute a complete sentence. So, there are 2 ways that the main way that scholars have resolved this is to presume that that final phrase, kathorizon panta tavromata, is in fact modifying an implied subject of lege back in verse 18. So verse 18 says, Jesus said, yada, 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 thus purifying or declaring all foods clean.
So in saying whatever that content was, he was doing that thing. He was namely purifying all the foods.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's a narrator's comment about what Jesus is doing in speaking.
Right.
I find this profoundly unlikely, and I think you agree, for a number of reasons. But mainly, and this is to borrow some of your language, but what is in view at the end of verse 19 is not Jesus as the subject, but everything that he's talking about. And if it were the case that that sentence then would pick up Jesus again, it probably would need to reintroduce the subject.
As Jesus.
So
it would say something like,
Hutos.
And Jesus said, you're doing this.
Yeah.
Jesus declared all.
You'd say exactly what would be in the Greek, which would be like, Hutos ho Jesus kathorizei. Pan broma.
Right, exactly.
But alas, that is not what the Greek says.
Right.
So the contribution of my article linguistically is basically to argue that actually that final phrase, though it is syntactically awkward, is in fact a part of Jesus' speech. So the whole sentence could be rendered, do you not know that nothing from outside going into a person is able to defile them, because it enters not into his heart but into the stomach and is cast out into the latrine, thus purifying all foods? ? Right at the end. So that whole final phrase is a part of Jesus' question to the disciples.
And the question itself is not a real question, right? It's
do you not know?
Do you not know? Right.
Don't you get this?
It's assuming the answer is
yes. Dimwits.
Exactly.
How do you not already know this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us the implications. So if it's part of Jesus' speech, like what does that mean for how we interpret the rest of the passage?
Yeah. So it means that what Jesus is saying is that something about the digestive process and the eating process and the expulsion process results in or constitutes a process of the purification of foods. Now, foods, as you pointed out as well, is quite misleading,
right?
Because in the Greek panta ta vromata more likely refers to the food which is in view in the context, not all different kinds of foods, but rather the food which I am speaking about. Which is in the context, which is food that has been defiled by unwashed hands.
Right.
So Jesus is saying food that is defiled by unwashed hands cannot defile a person, because instead of the food defiling the person, through the operations of the digestive system, purifies the food from impurity. So it works either way, right? Either the food makes you impure, or the body purifies the food, and Jesus sees these as mutually exclusive. So because the stomach or the digestive processes purifies all foods, therefore nothing going into a person can defile them. Now what this does is it limits the statement not to this all-encompassing, thus Jesus declared everything that might be called unclean by an ancient Jew to be actually in fact pure and therefore permitted. Rather, he's speaking more specifically about defiled food entering the body. That is purified by the body, and thus one does not need to worry about ingesting defiled food.
Right. So I mean, the original controversy in the beginning of Mark 7, right, is why don't your disciples wash their hands?
Exactly.
Right?
Not why are you eating illicit, animals.
Right, like pork.
Yeah.
So then the implication, obviously, would be that you don't have to wash hands.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. Although what's interesting is that Jesus assumes that hands can be defiled and that hands can defile food, and that if you eat that food, that food is really, has become defiled ritually. But he says it doesn't matter, though.
Yeah.
Because the body's going to purify it anyways.
So is there something unique about Jesus' statement then, about his view of, this process of ingesting and, the body actually purifying the food? Is that a unique contribution Jesus is making to the purity system, or is this just, basically Jesus arguing against a non-biblical aspect of what the Pharisees were doing? Because that's clear, right? That there's nothing in the Torah about washing hands, right? That's been a perennial problem.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so there's nothing in the Torah that says you must immerse before eating normal food or having a normal meal. There's nothing in the Torah that says that food can there's nothing in the Torah that says that food that has been defiled can defile the person who eats it. So the Pharisees acknowledge this, though, because they're acknowledging that their view and their practice is not a ruling of the Torah, what the later rabbis would call Deoraita, but a ruling of the tradition of the elders, what the later rabbis would call Derabanan. So this is why they do not ask, why are you sinning? Right? They say, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders?
Right.
So now Jesus explains why in the beginning with this stuff about the Corban vow, which we won't get into. But then he has this kind of ultimate reason as well, because actually, there's no reason to do this anyways. Now, whether this is a new contribution is an interesting question, because we see in the later rabbis, even though they affirm that people can be defiled by eating impure food, they accept that this is not a ruling of Torah. But they still say, well, we ascribe to it and we do the hand washing and et cetera. But also the rabbis also agree that anything that comes out below is pure. So they agree with Jesus'
the logic.
With the logic, yeah. So they just disagree with the implication, right? So the implication for Jesus is that, well, if that which comes out below is pure, if the body purifies all foods, because in Jewish law it was assumed, at least as I argue in the article, I argue that most Jews assumed that excrement was impervious to impurity, which is based on a very interesting reading of Deuteronomy. If you agree with that, though, then that means if what goes in is impure or defiled, then what comes out is pure. So obviously something happens.
Right.
So we see evidence that later Jews, and it probably wasn't invented by Jesus, but it was a ruling that Jesus agreed upon with some other people that, what comes out below is pure, so therefore the body does purify all foods. But then the implication of that is contested. Does that mean that nothing that goes into your body can defile? Or does that mean that we have to resolve it in some other way? So the rabbis resolve it in some other way, and Jesus just thinks that the implication of the fact that what comes out is different than what comes in terms of purity means that actually nothing has the capacity to defile you. So it's, you can see that he's participating in a discourse where there are shared assumptions, but also the ruling that we do have from Jesus is not in its form that we have it shared by other textual evidence that we have. But it's, so is it unique or special, or is a kind of interesting question, but it's participating in a kind of discourse, and he's making a creative ruling on the basis of certain shared assumptions.
Well, I think maybe what is the unique thing is the coupling of that perspective on Torah with the more moral aspect of it, of the things that come out of your heart, those are the things that actually defile you. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the innovation, and not as much. I mean, it seems to me like the Pharisees are. So if they agree with the kathorizon patata promata in the sense that if something goes in you and it goes out of you, it's pure.
They probably agree that the body does purify all food. They probably agree.
But they're coupling that with this tradition of the elders.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, no, I'm like, we can agree on this, right? On ingestion purifying, but I'm saying that actually what's really making you unclean is the things that come out of your heart.
Okay, so that he doesn't
make you unclean in the sense defile.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me parse this though a little bit because he actually says it's what the things that come out of a person, that is what defiles them. It's actually a really ambiguous statement. And as it is stated, it is actually a true statement that things that come out of human beings ritually defile them. So seminal emissions, menstrual blood, lochia.
Right.
And
so you might be able to hold to all those other things that we see in Torah to begin with, but he's adding an extra layer.
He's doing what I would call an allegorical interpretation of the law that we see in someone like Philo, which doesn't mean the allegory therefore undermines the physical real element, but he's saying Leviticus 12 and 15, which rule about bodily fluids that come out of people, making them defiled, actually they teach us about a moral truth.
Right.
And the practice of recognizing and ameliorating that impurity is supposed to teach us not just about physical impurity, but it's supposed to be an embodied practice that teaches us about something greater.
Yeah.
Which is also that the things that come out of your heart those are the things that also are morally defiling.
Right.
So the ritual laws actually teach us something moral. And he thinks that the Pharisees' concern about what goes in, a la the tradition of the elders, make them miss this dimension, this allegorical dimension of the Torah. I'm indebted to Daniel Boyarin's view of that. So this is a bit of a curveball.
Yeah. So last question. So honestly, I think of that perspective as like characteristic of diaspora Jews. You know, like
Philo.
Philo, letter of Aristeas. You know, it's just like
absolutely. Yes.
And I can imagine in that perspective, right, when you are or in that environment, when you are defending odd practices to Gentiles, you know, like why don't you just eat pork?
Exactly.
Right? Oh well, there's a deeper reason. You know, so
there's a logon for it.
Right. Exactly.
Says, right?
Exactly. But what does that tell us about Jesus, right? And so why would he be doing that in Palestine? Like, who is he defending against? And like, does it make him a diaspora like Jew? Like,
So this is the classic view of Mark, is that Mark is like a Gentile text. It's written to Gentiles, and it's just kind of like overturning the Torah and just trying to make it accessible to Gentiles. I don't believe this. Mark has a very, very detailed and precise knowledge of matters of Jewish law that is like profoundly impressive. His statements about the Korban vow are like so exact. If we look at the archaeology of Korban inscriptions and what we find in Mishnah Nedarim, he is reporting about that practice in a very, very precise way. So I highly doubt that Mark is a diaspora Jew trying to defend his customs to Gentiles. However, although I would agree that those kinds of moves do originate in a diaspora context. I wonder if there's some cultural permeability between, Judea and Galilee and the diaspora, that some of those ideas that would have originated in a diaspora context did get back to people in Judea and Galilee. And I think we should permit the possibility of having a bit more cultural permeability between spaces people traveled in the Mediterranean and ideas got around. Yeah. And, Philo seems to be known outside of Alexandria and, et cetera. So,
and all kinds of Greeks and Romans living in Palestine at the time.
Exactly. So, So cultural ideas got around. And I would say that this is a kind of very interesting move for a writer not in the diaspora.
Right.
But I don't think it's by any means necessarily implausible for Jesus to have read the Torah in a way that's reminiscent of someone like Philo with the letter of Aristeas, but while being in Judea and Galilee.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have to go reread the passage again now. I have read it 10 times.
Yeah. So Yair Furstenberg gestures towards the moral thing at the end of his NTS article, but in Daniel Boyarin's his new English article, Mark 7, finally, or something like that, as well as his Hebrew. Some Hebrew version of that article make really interesting points about the moral allegorical interpretation of the law. Would highly recommend.
Actually, I've read the ears, but I haven't gotten into Boyarin's yet. So I'll definitely do that.
Cool.
Well, thanks a lot for explaining all that to us, and hopefully the translations will be corrected soon.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe in like 100 years. Yeah. Thanks, dude.
Yep. Appreciate it.